Cracks and Pomo will be releasing a zine featuring a variety of writers, some of whom have been featured on this podcast. To order a copy or to make a contribution to our funds, please DM at Cracks and Pomo. So we're back at Cracks in Postmodernity with Eric Doce, also known as Hamburger Helpless, a meme page on Instagram that I found you through. Lots of fun throwback videos, all kinds of compilations, very creative. Also as a musician, plays harp, you compose, you're a lyricist, you're just an all-around artist. So Eric, first of all, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So before we're going to talk a little bit about Camille Paglia. We're both big fans. You post a lot of her old videos. I want to talk about your music. So first off, tell us a little bit about your influences, like who inspires your sound, your artistry, etc.
Well, I started playing harp in 2012 when I was in Oregon for a graduate school program, and a very dear friend of mine, Caleb, his mother, Jody, gave me a little harp when we kind of bonded over our mutual love of Joanna Newsom. And I said, I've wanted to take up harp for some time. I'd been a guitarist before that. I think my first instrument was cello. So I'd been playing music all my life, and I have like countless inspirations and influences. But when I started playing harp, a lot of my rhythmic sense was gleaned from the kind of rhythmic interventions on the harp that I heard through Joanna Newsom, who incorporates a lot of kind of like West African polyrhythm, over which she plays like kind of just American folk chords. So I found that really inspiring, just in the physicality of playing the instrument. But in terms of songwriting, I think she made a mark on me too, because I have more of a narrative sense of composition that I kind of gleaned from her work. But I also have a lot of inspiration from Steely Dan, like Donald Fagen and Walter Becker. They're kind of like jazz intervention on pop. I also take a lot of inspiration from Joni Mitchell, the way she thinks through her instrument, not in a kind of self-conscious or representational mode, but really these kinds of the reality of ideas on the instrument and through her lyrics, the way those kind of take shape. Her percussive style on the guitar also informed my percussive style on the harp. Also 90s pop, in general, like soul and R&B, things from the 70s and 80s and 90s. I love Mariah Carey. I love a lot of that stuff, yeah.
So before we get into Mariah, for all the lambs out there, so I listened to some of your tracks, and I was telling you before, like, I got this this kind of like old neo-soul vibe. So like if we're thinking late 90s, early 2000s, Badu, D'Angelo, but it has this like very rich texture that you could like, those types of artists really, they had, because they were so deeply rooted in the old style of soul. Yeah, but also the other thing I noticed, it reminded me of J. Cole's album For Your Eyes Only, which is super jazzy, but also like, I feel like the phrasing, the cadences, like, I don't know, gave me that kind of vibe. So it's an interesting mix.
Thank you. I've never heard that record.
You should.
But
Everyone should.
yeah, but the comparisons to the or the allusions to Erykah Badu and D'Angelo make a lot of sense. Those are definitely in the air. As I was, I don't want to say concocting, because that sounds a certain way. But when my sound was really forming, and around 2017, 2018, when I started taking myself on the harp more seriously in my own compositions, that was definitely in the air. That kind of the neo-soul chord progressions were really important to me in carving out my sound on the harp, especially with the harp being a kind of diatonic instrument where I'm kind of contending with levers to change keys. I don't want to say that there was like I leave a lot up to intuition when I'm composing, but there is a kind of thoughtfulness that has to happen when I'm like thinking about what key I'm in and what key I want to go to, what chords I'm using, what colors, all that. Yeah.
What about Sade? Is she an influence?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, I mean, Diamond Life was also really important to me. I remember summer 2018 really digging into I think it's a song called Sally, which is about the Salvation Army.
Yeah.
I love that. I loved that kind of way of posing kind of narrative material that, you know, these are love songs, but they're kind of posed through different characters and vignettes and scenarios.
And the videos, too, are very interesting.
I know. Yeah.
There's always a story.
And that's kind of storm-blown video for Sweetest Taboo.
Yeah.
The rain is just drenching the windows, and there they are, like, rehearsing. And there's this kind of, like, I don't know if it's like a love triangle or some kind of, like, unhappy affair.
Because Sweetest Taboo, that one and Is It a Crime, the videos are like a continuation of each other. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
But no, so on to Mariah. The reason I thought of Mariah is because Amy Winehouse, there's some quote from her where, like, she was talking to her producer who was mixing her track, and she's like, I forget how she said it in her, like, you know, her cocky kind of British. She was like, there are too many harps on this track. I sound like fucking Mariah Carey. You gotta get rid of the harps. So when I was listening to the harp, I was like, oh, Mariah. But I mean, other than that, like, there's something about maybe like Butterfly era Mariah, where it's like that's like it's beginning to play with hip hop, but like it's really very much soul music, but really rich layering texture between the vocals, the live instruments. That's what it made me think of a little.
Yeah, well, I would say Winehouse is a huge inspiration too. I mean, obviously, it's been a long time that I've kind of her music's been embedded in my soul, but yeah, there's a lushness to the music of Mariah Carey. There's a kind of continuation of the dream of like Minnie Riperton. That Minnie Riperton fully realized in her time on this earth. But there is that kind of dreamy, almost hallucinatory quality.
The fantasy. It's all about fantasy.
It's all about fantasy.
It's interesting how the fantasy complex arose for her, because, I mean, part of it was the mixed race, like feeling like she never fit in, the divorce. It was an ugly divorce. So, like, always trying to escape. And still to this day, she's trying to escape. You can see it.
Yeah. All the kind of troubles that Paglia describes as motivating great artists and, you know, visionaries.
On the outside, as she says at the end of Butterfly. She's always someone who's on the outside. Like, this is the thing with inclusion and, like, if you're always included, if you never feel on the outside, then, like, no one's going to create great art. Like, it's the alienation.
I mean, and the whole vibe of like inclusive discourses is so patronizing and such a pat on the head, and it doesn't stoke anything that would create that, you know, that would inspire a creative soul. It's just it's been said on this podcast, it's the Grey Gloop of it all.
Yes, it's true. And Mariah's, I feel like she's so underappreciated because, all right, everyone knows she has a great voice, but she gets written off as this, like, ditzy pop star. And I'm like, okay, this woman's a true musician because, first of all, like, the way she arranges her vocals, layers them, then she writes her own music. The lyrics are fascinating. The words, the vocabulary, like, but the imagery, too, the themes are, like, I just feel like, also because she's an obnoxious diva, people don't like that.
Her insanity is one of the most compelling aspects of her work.
You either love it or hate it, though.
I love. There's this, like, fantastic clip from, like, maybe 10 years ago where she's celebrating Christmas on Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
And it's like this little handheld moment with her assistant, and it's been called the sequel to Inland Empire. And and she's just going on and on about how it's okay to celebrate Christmas on Valentine's Day, that the two can coexist. And they're listening to this recording of her and her mother, and she's like, it's funny that we're right by there. She's like, a student of Juilliard made her debut at Lincoln Center. Like,
oh my God,
just the gray gardens of it all.
Speaking of, we are on, what is this, Columbus and like 68th, 69th on the street. So if you hear sirens and beeping, it's because we're on the streets of New York, enjoying a lovely cafe.
Which I would say is another important kind of inspiration and influence on the record.
Yeah.
There's a lot of street sounds, a lot of just like kind of sound bites of people speaking, just weird internet memes and things.
Yeah.
Which was kind of my way to represent what I do on the Instagram page.
Yes.
But it was also this kind of way to capture... These songs were kind of these like Tomo Bedlam kind of songs, these kind of mad songs that I wanted to preserve this like asylum quality, this like wandering a madhouse, kind of like the speech of crazy people, just kind of weaving in and out of the work.
So tell people, like, what are some of, like, where do you get some of those clips from? Who are we quoting? 'Cause it's really interesting when you see them pieced together.
Yeah, it's all kind of varied. Some of them are like trannies that I love, like Jose Costello Branco, or Koki Toki is on one of the tracks. Also, my dear friend Kara Cunningham is reading my astrological chart across a few of the tracks. I included that. I don't know. I thought it was important to capture these voices and these moments in time. And kids are so obsessed with like gender bending and all that. Why not include these bizarre voices from the periphery? Yeah,
and you got the Red Scare clip when they're like, what if we carry little guns around in our little
purses?
That was fun. I forgot about that line.
Yeah, that's iconic. Yeah. Iconic, preceded by the Barbara Walters. Speaking to her, she's reading Nicki Minaj lyrics to Mariah Carey. She's like, I'm quick to check a bitch if she is out of line.
I forgot about that. Speaking of Barbara Walters, I saw Barbara Walters across the street coming out of the ABC building many years ago. It was Halloween 2012, her ghost. Yeah, so she used to roam around here quoting Nicki Minaj.
Like a little gremlin, yeah. Like
little Barbara. Barbara Walters. All right, so we're going to get into Paglia. And I should just tell everyone, I have my vintage copy, my first edition of Sexual Personae that my brother was very kind to buy for me from Left Bank Books for way too much money. But Sexual Personae, so this came out, what was it, 1990? Yeah, so, okay, tell everyone, because if you listen to this podcast, you have to know who she is, to talk about her all the time. She's actually read some of my pieces, thanks to our friend Glenn Belverio, who's awesome. Glenda. All right, so tell people, like, your first forays into Camille, what drew you, etc.
Well, the first time I'd heard of Camille, she was kind of posed as a boogeyman in the kind of academic, this was like 10 years ago, the kind of academic circle I was in that I no longer really associate with. I was in a graduate program at the University of Oregon, where I kind of felt as that year and a half that I was there progressed, I felt less and less like I belonged there. And I kind of really started butting heads with the ideas that I was given to eat, and I felt more like turf that was being claimed or staked.
Turf or turf?
Stop. Turf. Yeah, for real though. No, but I felt like I was land to be conquered for an intellectual battle that was not my own. And it was there too that I had heard Paglia's name spoken with contempt by the feminist professor. During one class, she said, it was a class on where we were discussing like sexual assault and she said something, I don't remember what exactly she said. She's like, oh, and then you have feminists like Camille Paglia saying that, oh, it's just a night of bad sex, and that women should just be trying to humiliate men. And, you know, she went on this, and I'm thinking to myself, like, why isn't, like, I'm thinking to myself, I remember raising my hand, I said, could you explain a little more? Could you expand upon that? I've heard her name so often. Like, what's she about? And she went on just a mini diatribe against Paglia, and I just found those ideas so compelling and actually real. And I could tell that she could see the excitement on my face, and I sensed this like kind of maternal shutting down of it. So I dropped out the next term, and I came back to New York, where I grew up. And it wasn't until a couple of years later that I really fully delved into Paglia's work. I was just so taken by it. And what really spoke to me was her valuing of artistic work, and that she thinks of the artist as somebody who works with their hands, and that she respects the process.
Yeah, so I mean, you can read her many ways. Similar to Mariah Carey, you can listen to her many ways. I mean, there's the literary critic, the art critic, the social critic, the, you know, kind of wild ideologue, pundit, whatever. But I mean, over time I've come to see how, like, reading her on a psychological level, it's really fascinating because she's building a lot on Freud's insights, Nietzsche's psychology to an extent, if you could call him, you know, a psychologist. But yeah, I want to hear from you, like, how was reading her helpful for you on a personal level, aside from, like, the art criticism, the connection with music, like, for yourself, like, what was most useful about reading her?
I think I'll get there as I kind of talk it out, but I mean, immediately knowing the difficulty with which she had getting published,
Yeah.
the kind of 20 years or so of just kind of nose to the grindstone, kind of like hidden, you know, kind of being hidden away, and kind of like taking her time and trying to find work and not really finding work, and like having trouble, like maybe being taken seriously by the establishment, being shut down by the establishment for
20 years, right? That she didn't get Sexual Personae.
Yeah.
But imagine, like, how much you really have to believe in yourself and your project to wait 20 years. Like, that's crazy.
I know. I thought 5 years for my own project was more than enough time. I started writing the material on the record in like 2017, 2018, and I finished maybe like early 2020. And I dealt with a lot of just like rejection, and a lot of just like just a lot of rejection, a lot of different a lot, just like financial troubles trying to get the work done, running into like practicality, people not wanting to work with me, all kinds of experiences that stalled the completion of my first record. That, I don't know, if I didn't have Paglia's example, maybe I'm sure I would have stuck to my guns, but I would have felt even more lost. I remember feeling lost when I discovered Paglia. I remember the kind of value of, I remember feeling kind of enthralled by the process of making art and making music, but not feeling valued in any way by any kind of like intellectual that was talking about art. Art was always spoken of as some kind of conspiracy or with some kind of ulterior motive in mind. But what I found in Paglia was somebody who understood the artistic process, and the artistic process across the human record, into the distant past, that artists are real weirdos. You know, as she puts it, you know, she says, think of Dante. You know, Dante was expelled by his own city, and he spent years, you know, penning an epic poem, putting all of his enemies in hell. Like, she and the way she completely identified with that it all just made so much sense to me. And the way she values taking your time as an artist, you're not on anybody's clock but your own. There's such a rush now, especially to put out material and to market it and to stake out an audience. But I think the real work of an artist a lot of the time happens alone.
Yeah, and I mean, so when you read her art and literary commentary, criticism, like you get a sense that art is something of like cosmic proportions. Like it's not, because I don't know, when I was in college, they really reduces just its political implications, which sure, they're there, they matter, they're worth talking about. But if you reduce art to just politics, like it's so much more than that, but also it's boring. Like there's a certain point where you want something like that asks deep questions about human nature and the cosmos and, you know, why do we act the way we do? Like what is beauty? What is evil? And when you read her, like you get this sense that the universe is expanding. And I just wonder, like, if you look at universities now, like, I don't know, people are miserable. Kids are miserable. Because you have them reading Judith Butler. You have them reading these post-structuralists. And as Paglia says, like, all people know how to do is sneer now. Like, no one knows how to, like, delve deeply and say, like, what is most true, what is most beautiful and profound, right?
I have something in mind that I want to say, but the first thing that comes to mind is one of my favorite moments of Paglia. I think she's at the Yale Political Union or something like that, and she says...
That was epic. This little 5-year-old wants to go to the big gay unicorn place. Good job, Upper West Side parents.
That was
I only would have loved that one.
I loved that. There's this moment of Paglia where she goes on this minute-long song.
You posted this video.
It's one of my favorite ones. My favorite ones, and she says these women, they don't know how to read an image. You know, when you open Harper's Bazaar, when you open Vogue, you have to feel everything going back to classical Athens. You have to feel everything from Botticelli's nudes through to Titian, to Giorgione, to Delacroix, Ingres, coming right down into this image. But these ladies coming out of the English departments who are the backbones of women's studies, they don't know how to look at an image.
Yeah. No, I remember the one where I think this is when she was younger. She was sitting in at a conference, like a Lacanian conference, and they showed a picture, and the woman was like decapitation. Right. And then like she had a hissy fit. But yeah, no, I mean it's...
But Venus de Milo gained everything by losing her arms.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, okay, but it's, again, you see how people become miserable when you suck this cosmic sense out of the arts, because you're basically denying people have souls, that there is something deeper beyond the political level.
This is how I began, what began really as prompts for lyrics for the first record, and even onto the second record. The album that I'm writing now, that I'm composing now, that I haven't recorded yet, it takes a different tone. There's more of a tone of like gratitude and familial bond and friendship. There's like a recognition of the people in my life who I love. But on the first record, I was dealing with just a lot of loneliness and isolation and sadness, which is why the tone of the first album is so kind of down. But I was really wading through all that stuff. But as you were saying, that the kind of academic political slant on art lacks a soul. And what I was kind of building when I was writing my first record, I was using as prompts observations, like on my daily walks, connections I was making in my mind, things that don't really have a place in day-to-day conversation, but are kind of perfect. But are like perfect for the song form. The song form is a place for all these like synchronicities, all these observations that make no sense, that might make sense, but would be so to sit you here and spend 5 minutes explaining why this song, why the lyrics in the song make sense to me. It doesn't have the same effect as just making that lyrical connection or that musical connection. Just observations of the cosmos, observations of the emotional cosmos, of things you see in the world. Again, that just only makes sense in music.
Yeah. So this sense of like the poetic, which doesn't, which captures something that transcends like pure rationalism. And, I was, like you were saying last night, you texted me about the last chapter, the Emily Dickinson chapter. And so I started rereading it. And first, like, okay, you understand how much Paglia values poetry as a really distinct literary form that, again, captures the sense of mystery, what's between the lines, which can't be articulated with pure rational thought. But also her writing, especially in that chapter, like as a scholar, she's a poet. Like she's not dry and boring like these post-structuralists. Like she's so like you're on the edge of your seat. She's poetic, she's artistic in her scholarly writing.
Yeah, I've written down some of these passages from the Amherst Madame de Sade chapter. There's a moment where she says, of this poem of Dickinson, she describes, she writes, God has shrunk like the embalmed head of Queequeg's totem. The poet sits him on the makeshift scales of human judgment. It's supper time, communion or cannibalism.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Thought is paralyzed with the brain dropped like a handkerchief. She writes in response to this line out of Dickinson, where Dickinson says, I've dropped my brain, right? And she goes on, she says, but such an object will hardly float to the floor. We hear a muffled thump, like the paperboy hitting the stoop with the evening edition.
Wow. Yeah, no, she picked, but that's the thing, like, if you were, most university professors would read that and, like, find, again, some, like, political kind of reading, but like again, Paglia is reading deep into these like spiritual cosmic implications that are much more fascinating.
These impressions from the world itself, these kind of almost mundane things, like the paper hitting the stoop, that carries with it such significance, but and those things are felt. Again, the what operates, how she talks about, there's one interview where she talks about her thinking, like her most deep and complex thinking is happening below the level of like signification, below the level of rational meaning. This is why she says she values her dance students and her music students so much, is that they understand this. They have like an intuitive knowledge of the world.
Yeah, what's interesting when she talks about her students, because first of all, like she adjuncted for years, like all over the place, community colleges. Now she's at University of the Arts in Philly. But yeah, like what you see is that she's worked mostly with artists, whether that's dancers or visual artists or musicians, but also like mostly working class, urban, people of color. And she always like notes the cultural, but also like the intellectual difference with that population, because they have a much more earthy, carnal way of processing information, as opposed to this kind of like the WASP establishment. Even if you're not a WASP, even if you're not an Anglo-Saxon Protestant, like the elite establishment wants you to think of this very detached, very cold, rational way. Whereas if you're a dancer, if you're coming from the city, if you're Black, if you're Hispanic, like you have a different read on human nature, beauty, these dynamics.
It's interesting because when I was an undergrad, I had a really well-rounded experience, and it's part of the reason why I did so well there. Although maybe studying philosophy wasn't the best choice that I made, the faculty there at Purchase College really cared about us, and they really wanted to enrich our thinking. Although there were some trends among a couple professors who I still value and love, that kind of geared more towards the kind of Marxist or political or kind of post-structuralist. But there was always counterweight to that. There were always other options offered. But when I got to graduate school, and they really warned me against graduate school, every professor who I approached when I was an undergrad and I said, I want to go to graduate school, they said, no, you're not doing that. They said, no. Those are going to be the worst years of your life. You don't do it. But I was stubborn. I was really stubborn.
Good thing I listened. I avoided that.
Yeah. So I just want to speak to this, what you were just saying. I had this experience when I got to grad school because they were trying to really mold you into this waspified version of yourself.
And yet they're all about diversity and BIPOCs, but not like actual like people of color.
Right. Ironic. But I had this experience where I got there. I couldn't keep up with the reading schedule, first of all. But second, that was when I was given my first harp. and I kind of escaped into that world. There was such a pull in opposite directions, and it's clear which direction I chose. But I remember that first year, just trying to write my papers, but I was always taken up with the kind of music and the kind of music that they were trying to cut out of you. I remember specifically there was one class where we were, the professor, I feel like she was trying to get back at us. She assigned this book by Jasper Puar. It's called Terrorist Assemblages. And she was using it as an example of what not to do. And I remember she pointed to a certain run of what was really academic jargon, and it wasn't a good book. But she's like, see, there's like a rhythm to it. And it's like, lady, what do you know about rhythm? I don't know. Wow. But yeah, there was just a real kind of battle in myself that year between these kinds of just like this kind of careerist, academic-minded self they were trying to pull out of me, and what was really going on, which was this like, I remember introducing my roommate to the music of Joanna Newsom, and he fell in love with it, and I fell in love with it again by listening to it with him, and all those rhythms in her works and all of her poetry, all the ways that she colors her language. I was taken up more by that than what I was there to do in the institutional setting.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, it's amazing how the institutional suck out the passion for whatever content you're studying. But so then I wanted to go into, like we were mentioning before, the Jordan Peterson interview, which kind of, I think, jump-started her resurgence into popularity, especially amongst, us, younger crowd. But there's a point in the interview where they start talking about like the Freudian themes. He's bigger on the Jungian stuff, but there's overlap. Yeah, so the Great Mother, the archetypes basically. And I from that interview, but also reading all of her stuff. For me, the Freudian stuff has been a big help because all my life, like since I was very young, like my parents sent me to psychologists, and they were all behaviorists. Like it was always CBT. And when I asked these bigger questions about like deeper issues in my psyche, but also like spiritual questions, always dismissive. It's always like, how do we reframe your thinking? It's not as deep as you think it is. Just, everything's fine. You just gotta be comfortable with yourself. And reading her, I was like, wait, no, like I'm pretty fucked up. Like learning behavioral, it's not going to get to the root of, because with Freud and to a greater extent with Jung, like they understand that there's a cosmic dimension to our psychological struggles. There is something spiritual going on, which she really gets.
When I discovered Paglia and when I heard her speak in interviews, when I watched footage from the 90s of her, there was this like immediate feeling of like, oh my God, somebody feels and understands this artistic mania, this creative mania that I can't seem to quell. This kind of like all these she understood the cyclical nature of creativity, the cyclical nature of like history and the cosmos. All these circles, she got it. She gets it. And
part of it's because first, like she's Italian, so like naturally you're gonna get those things. Grew up in a culturally Catholic environment, so these archetypes, the drama of good and evil and the flesh, all that. But it's like, it was very clear to me that the psychological establishment really will not allow any Freudian, any type of psychoanalytic kind of discourse, to our detriment though. Because like reading her, like it can actually free you, because you are able to label some of the things going on.
Because you don't have to agree with every conclusion that she writes or states. As she said about Freud, it's not about the conclusions or the answers that he came up with. Those were always tentative. But it's about the kind of thinking that he opened up, the kinds of questions that he posed. You don't go to Freud for his explanations of X, Y, and Z of any given psychic phenomena, but it's it's the questions that he opened up, kind of creative thinking.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately with the Oedipal stuff and the mommy and daddy issues, like, sure, it's outlandish, but when you really engage with it, you see that it's very useful, because most people do have issues with their parents that are unresolved. And again, if we're only looking from a surface level behaviorist point of view, you're not really going to resolve these issues. And again, what Freud and Jung are getting at is like our relationship with our parents reflect this greater cosmic struggle that we experience between ourselves and the creator, the forces of good and evil, and light and dark, whatever. So I don't know, like I found Paglia was my way into Freud, and that stuff I find to be very practical. I don't know about you.
When she says things like, I don't think quote, I don't think violence in the media causes violence. On the contrary, I think it causes passivity and inaction. There's an ontology there. There are these, I feel like, and I can't articulate it fully, but in an intuitive way, there are statements about our being, about cause and effect, and about the human drives and the human emotions, that I think kind of goes back to Spinoza, although I'm sure many will disagree with me.
That's interesting.
But both philosophers, Paglia and Spinoza, and Nietzsche and Freud, understand nature.
Yeah. That there's something given to us. It's not just this mechanistic enlightenment, autonomous, like there are these forces beyond our control, whether it's God, whether it's the universe, but like there's something outside of us, which makes life very dramatic and unpredictable.
Yeah. I don't know if I should, I don't know in which direction I should go, because I could speak on the way I value what Spinoza wrote about consciousness, that it is our perception that kind of reverses the order of cause and effect, and what we take, we witness an effect in the world and we take it to be the cause. That consciousness does it with itself, that it believes itself to be the author, the seed of all of our actions, when the causes for those things are deeper and not so easily explained. Although there are explanations for them, Spinoza would argue. But it is not. Right? What does he say? Consciousness takes for cause what really is an effect.
Yeah. So while we're talking about Germans, the most valuable thing, not the most valuable thing, but one of the valuable things that she does with Nietzsche's thought is when she applies it to the current university system, because her whole thing against the middle class white girls, the WASP, bourgeois, whatever, it's everything they do is Nietzschean resentment. It's pure resentment, the sneering that she's always talking about. It's these unresolved conflicts, whether it's with daddy, whether it's an issue with the guy, jealousy of other girls, and that's one of the other things that I feel like Red Scare has really taken from Paglia and brought it really far. But on a psychological level, that resentment is, when it doesn't go addressed, it creates these psychos, these people who are getting out of hand,
Yeah, I wish I had more to say about that, but you put it really well. I love that Nietzsche is really important to Doce. I love that Doce is interested in this, what does she call it? Non-traditional Catholic reading of Nietzsche. Where can he?
Yeah, after Doce insulted me and the Nietzschean stuff twice, I started boycotting Red Scare.
More about that.
No, because I did this exhibit about Nietzsche back in February, and I told her and Anna, I'm quoting you in here if you want to come check it out. And they're like, oh, cool. And then people were sending them pictures of the exhibit, and then they go on the pod and they're like, yeah, apparently we're quoted at this Catholic conference about Nietzsche. Why weren't we invited? And they're just being bitchy.
Yeah.
And then I wrote this article about them, about Nietzsche, and I quoted them in Newsweek. And they're like, this is how you know Newsweek is a failing publication, because they're quoting Red Scare podcast and BAP. It's oh my God. And I saw them this last weekend at, I'm not going to say who, but there was a reading. And I was like, hey, I'm the one who wrote the Nietzsche thing. And they're like, oh, okay. Like, whatever. No, we love them. We hate them, but we love them. But I'm on a serious note. They really, as much as they pretend to be, like, idiotic, there's a very smart reading, both of Paglia, but also of Nietzsche, that, like, they're applying it very well to the current generation. And, like, if only they didn't, like, do this whole, like, performance artist, like, BPT art host. Like, they're actually very intelligent, but they won't admit it.
That the episode they did in 2018 with Vanessa Place on rape jokes, I think that's like a field guide for any artist that wants to create, or not wants to create, but does create material that can be seen as controversial or engages with, like, touchy subject matter. That Vanessa Place episode, like, is among the things I think one would really need to hear.
The episode that was most helpful for me was the Ocasio Crytes one, where she was crying about Palestine. No, because they actually use Lash more than anything. A little bit of Nietzsche and Freud, but no, this millennial, like, the narcissism, the being desperate for attention, and then using these virtue signals just to get attention. I was like, oh shit, that's me. Like, I am guilty of all the things they're saying. Yeah, and that's why, like, reading these people, listening to Red Scare, I see how it's enabling me to call myself out and be like, okay, like, I am part of this culture of narcissism, of resentment, and I do need to, like, use a little bit of psychoanalysis to sort through why am I like this? What's at the root of these issues? But I don't know, like, it's all very practical if you get past the performativity of it all.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what to say in response to that, but I vibe with that.
Let me ask you, do you have, like, other thoughts about just her gender stuff, like what Paglia says about gender and sexual personae? There's a lot there. I don't know. Because, like, for me, the fact that, like, it's not just that she believes that in biological gender that there's a binary, but using Freud's insights, she picks up on a lot of interesting gender dynamics, both in literature, but also in, like, everyday interactions that have helped me to understand myself. And, like, so we're picking up after a brief bathroom break. So what were we saying? Where are we going with this?
Yeah, well, I didn't really want to remark on her kind of gender critique necessarily. I don't know if I have anything new or interesting to say in that regard, but another thing that really that I find so kind of thrilling about Paglia's writing itself is her capacity for kind of polysemy, like multiple meanings at once, and her ability to just kind of keep things seemingly, like, really straightforward, but there's always several layers of meaning at play. There's, like, she writes in the Dickinson chapter, she writes, Dickinson's impalements are even more atrocious. She quotes Dickinson, "It is simple to ache in the bone or the rind, but gimlets among the nerve mangle daintier, terribler," close quote. Gimlets among the nerve are stabs or twinges of pain, a spiritual neuralgia, but the metaphor demands we see boring tools like corkscrews riding through and shredding the nerve fibers. It is like a butchering surgeon's scalpel or a drunken sculptor's auger. What is a dainty mangling? This decadent juxtaposition of beauty and horror resembles Baudelaire's hideous delicacies. It is subliminally sexual Spencerian effect that few English poets attempt. The rind, opposed to bone, is human skin. Normally, only fruit, cheese, or bacon has a rind. Dickinson's rind makes the body peelable. Apollo with a potato parer. She flays the Marsyas of humanity, exposing raw nerve. Man is a red-ribboned écorché in her laboratory.
Wow, read like a true musician.
Thanks. I try. This allusion to Marsyas, the satyr from ancient Greek lore, who was skinned by Apollo for challenging him. Yeah. But Marsyas also appears in the Symposium when Alcibiades is raving at Socrates, and I think he compares Socrates to Marsyas, to this little statuette of Marsyas that you can open up, and there are little figurines of little gods inside, and that this is an allusion to, this is a description of the feeling of love, to want to tear someone open, to expose all the tiny little gods that are inside. To have that allusion there, not only to the myth, to the Apollonian myth where Marsyas is flayed, right? She's talking about Dickinson's use of the word rind makes the body peelable, but also the madness of passion, the madness of love that Alcibiades kind of summons up in referring to Socrates as Marsyas, as this little thing that he wants to open up. Again, just the level of kind of historical allusion and meaning that's present in her work, and she's not on the nose with it. She's not, all the material is there, and if you're sensitive to it, it really hits you and it really works.
Yeah. No, but I feel like that sensitivity, that receptivity, we could say. I'm sorry, I'm just staring at these like little gaggle of Upper West Side teens who just dropped a 6-pack of Coronas on the sidewalk. This is why. Never mind, I'm not going to comment on it. No, like that receptivity to such beautiful, profound writing is like sucked out of, like in the institution, the universities. Like that is not encouraged. It's not cultivated, but
though I think, as a writer, you should really win those stripes. Like that's something that is accomplished after many years. And it's not for the faint of heart, but it is discouraged. This kind of writing is discouraged as irrational, as illusory, as not to the point, and not scholarly.
So now we're gonna have to get into the critiques of Paglia. So Helen Andrews, let me say this first, disclaimer. So Helen is one of the editors at American Conservative. I've written them as a for them as a freelancer. I wrote this, it was last summer. I pitched this piece about like Paglia's second wave to them, and they wanted me to mention Helen's book because, it's American Conservative. And then I asked her to come on the pod, totally ignored me. So Helen Andrews, if you're listening, I'll still have you on. I'll debate Paglia with you. Actually, okay, so like first before we say whether we agree or disagree, I guess she was basically saying like the book is all about boomers who like have gotten it wrong. And first of all, I'm just like, I would never group Paglia into like okay boomer archetype. Because she's based, she's cool. Is she right about everything? No, but so I was just surprised.
Yeah. Right, it's not the point. I see the Helen Andrews piece. That's her name, right?
Yeah, Helen
Andrews. Oh, who's fucking stunning writing. I was taken.
You liked it?
I was taken by every sentence. I thought it was really well written. I saw it as it came across to me more as a love letter to Paglia.
No, she definitely shows respect. Like she's like, the woman may be wrong about some things ideologically, but like she's a brilliant. Oh yeah, Helen gets that for sure.
Yeah. As for the critique, what Paglia, her criticism is that Paglia didn't foresee the forces that she was summoning, that pop culture would retard and ruin the minds of the young, that we wouldn't turn into little Paglias, but you kind of become even more ignorant. Is that what she's saying?
What I was getting is, one, she's like, okay, Paglia endorses the sexual revolution too much. Right. And the thing is, Paglia understands that the sexual revolution was supposed to sow chaos. Yes. And then her whole thing is, but you guys went for this politically correct, bureaucratic, if you want sexual libertinism, you got to be ready for the chaos, which she is. But not everyone has that kind of constitution. Like, most people are wimps and they can't handle chaos. And Helen Andrews is like, why are you, like, Paglia, you shouldn't be supporting the sexual revolution at all because it's just not sustainable. And I'm like, well, they're both right. And I'm saying, like, for me, coming from, like, my ideological, my religious point of view, sure, I don't think we're made to go be fucking everybody. There's going to be consequences, I know it. But if you so choose to live that kind of life, like, I don't know. Like, I see I see what Helen's doing with that critique. So, like, I'm not going to say she's wrong. But the other one was the pop culture thing that she was like, oh, you know, we got to, like, do scholarship on pop culture rather than high culture. And it's like, I know pop culture shit, but that's what it is. Like, pop culture is pop culture. It's always going to be here. So if we don't theorize about
It says that pop culture is American culture. We have no high arts tradition in the United States. All we have is pop culture. She says that's why we're not rationalists. That's why the post-structural turn makes no sense in an American context, because we have no rationalist heritage to be revolting against. We're the culture, quote, to quote her, we're the culture that invented Hollywood, for God's sake. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it would be ideal if we all became little Paglios, because she does create this great synthesis between high and low culture. And we have people like, I don't know, we have Warhol. In a way, Gaga tried to do it. Personally, yeah, I mean, I think my, like, unpopular opinion is that Rosalia is the runner-up, or she's carrying on this legacy of high and low, because she's classically trained in flamenco. Like, she knows real music. She's very in touch with, like, the lowbrow mass culture of TikTok, but also, like, Latin pop, reggaeton, dembow. Like, she's able to create a synthesis that's, sure, she's a cultural appropriator, who gives a shit? Like, it's very intelligent, and it's, I just feel like underappreciated. So I don't know, yeah.
And she always sounds frightened.
Yeah.
Like she's just seen a mouse.
Yeah. The Spanish temperament. No, so I mean, I get Helen Andrews' critique.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, I'm not here for criticizing Paglia. Like, I don't agree with everything she says. Like, there's certain things you're totally wrong. Like her criticism of Lady Gaga, I'm like, you don't really get her. But I don't know, I'm just not going to write a chapter being like, I mean, I did write a Substack post about 10 things I disagree about her. But that was just like for fun. I don't know. Helen Andrews, at the end of the day, come on the pod. Love to hash things out with you, but you're not wrong.
No, I don't think she's wrong. I think it's maybe the most level-headed criticism of Paglia that I've seen. I've seen another one where somebody did not like her reading of the birds.
Yes.
Do you remember that one? And the dude was like, "Why do I care that you thought this to yourself?" It's like, you have no personality in your own writing, dude.
Yeah.
Like, and that's something that kind of, like, those Paulian asides where she tells you what she's thinking or what she experienced in a moment, that's what she gets from, like, Pauline Kael, which is interesting to me.
Yeah.
Another kind of in the Spinozistic line, in my like perceived Spinozistic line of people who don't separate. Is there something Pauline Kael said that all of you reacts all at once, at this notion of, like, impressionistic reactions and things, like intuitive? Oh no, you're either, what are you, cleft as a human being that you're not all reacting at once? Like, that's another thing in the kind of
the enlightenment or mechanistic kind of, no, it's just this disintegration of the being, of the soul, the psyche, the body. I don't know. With Helen, one last thought. It's like, as much as she does say, like, she holds Paglia in esteem, I just think it's weird for conservatives, quote unquote, to be criticizing her, because, like, you're basically on the same side as her. Like, she believes in objective truth, in a gender binary.
No one's done more good work.
Yeah,
for,
like, if you're a conservative critiquing her, like, cringe. No. Like, most of these conservative outlets, like First Thing, City Journal, like, go crazy over her, even though they disagree about the porn and the abortion and whatever. But anyway, I'm sorry, I'm just noticing the New York link thing, the box, Oscar Wilde Memorial Bookshop, Happy Pride. Oscar Wilde would not go to the Pride parade. He had no interest.
Hell no. I've never been to a Pride.
Yeah.
I've never wanted to be there. No thanks.
I think it's like a terrorist hotspot. Like, people are definitely gonna get shot. Not that I want that to happen at all, but I'm just afraid of any, like, mass gathering. Like, I don't even like to go to malls anymore because I'm afraid I'm gonna get shot. I don't know.
I think that's a reason to go to the mall.
Probably. Anyway, Eric, let's go to any plugs you have. What should people check out? What do you want to tell the people about?
I have my page that's at hamburger.helpless. That's on Instagram that I work on pretty much every day. You can find the link to the fundraiser for my first record. I'm trying to raise some funds so I could get the thing mastered so that y'all can hear it. There's also hamburger.harpist, which is just a page with just me playing harp. But yeah, that's all I really got right now.
So, Mark, thank you so much for coming on. This was a
Thank you
good
for having
time.
me.